Good afternoon, and I'm delighted to be here, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the very generous introduction. I did not know I was coming to hear my obituary. He also said that I'm supposed to say a few words. I haven't said just a few words since 1987, when you first elected me. And it seems like every year my speeches get longer and less interesting. But I hope in the few moments that I have the microphone that I can add to some sense of understanding of where we are at the State House and in state government with regard to our energy future. I would summarize by saying the following. We have about the most expensive electricity in America. It compromises the growth of our economy. It affects budgets from family budgets to institutional budgets to business budgets, and so it's a really critical issue. We have a responsibility as a state government to ensure that there's a reliable, steady supply of energy, and most recently we've had reports which indicate that because of our moving from coal and oil-fired generated generation capacity to natural gas and other forms of energy, and because so many of our plants are now aging out, that over about a 4-year period we will have a reduction in New England of about 8,300 megawatts of capacity, approximately 45% of which is used here in Massachusetts alone among the 6 New England states. In addition, we have the Pilgrim Power Plant in Plymouth, which, although it has recently received an extension of 20 years by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, as has happened in 2 other plants here in New England, after they got the extension, they came to realize that their plants were in such bad shape based upon the old technology and the wear and tear in the first 20 years that they are not likely to be able to operate the plant for another 20 years. It would be too expensive to do the repairs that are necessary to ensure public safety, and therefore, as happened in 2 other cases, Yankee Row and Vermont Yankee, those 2 plants closed within a couple of years after they received their 20-year extension, and it is likely that within the next 2 or 3 years, Pilgrim will close also, taking offline another 700 or 800 megawatts of power. So we have to replace all of this power, well over 9,000 megawatts of power. We also have to deal with our climate change situation, and no state in America has worked harder on reducing our carbon footprint, and we've largely done that by encouraging and supporting conservation programs and stimulating the creation of green energy technology. In the case of conservation, we've had programs online for more than 25 years, paid for through your utility bills, providing free energy audits, and then installation of low-cost, simple measures for energy conservation, and then providing very low-interest or no-interest loans to handle the larger pieces of your implementing your energy audits from new furnaces and windows and sliders and things of that nature. And about a third of all of the properties in Massachusetts, residential properties, have been audited and have participated in these programs, resulting in significant savings. And the private sector has been even more active and more robust participation because it affects their bottom lines. So we've done a very good job in Massachusetts on conservation, and we're really the #1 state in conservation. The second major area was to focus on solar energy, and based on a series of policies we put in place, solar energy now in Massachusetts represents 10,000 jobs, and we are the leading state, very small state though we are, with relatively few months of robust sun. We are nonetheless the leading per capita state in the solar energy field. And most recently, we have revisited this issue, and as of yesterday, we were able to send a bill to the governor's desk well beyond when we should have, because of the conflict over the rate at which we are to reduce the subsidies that help stimulate the industry to allow the market to take over and eventually go down to zero subsidies, because it would be totally market-driven. And some people wanted us to not touch any of the subsidies. They like it just the way they are. And some people wanted us to get rid of them almost completely, if not completely. And the argument then was which subsidies will be reduced at what rate in what order. And we finally came to a resolution this week, and it will carry us through another maybe 9 months, and we're going to be back at it again. We can't make that same mistake again as we stimulate the wind energy industry here in Massachusetts. And so we're going to have to learn from what happened there to make sure the same thing doesn't happen here. And from what I'm told, this should be very easy, because the wind industry is just looking for support in a regulatory fashion and make sure that they can do what they know how to do, and don't need to have much more help from the state than that. I hope that's still true. That's what I was told a while ago in meetings with folks from the offshore wind energy industry, who have now received federal licenses and franchise, or whatever the proper terminology is. You'll hear it from these folks in a little while. But the bottom line is we're now going on to the next chapter in the conversation, which is how do we stimulate offshore wind, onshore wind, hydropower, imported and domestically produced. And we're going to be debating over the next 3 months, prior to the completion of our formal sessions, an omnibus energy bill that looks at particularly those two areas of green energy and green technology. The solution that's been presented and proposed with regard to hydro is that we allow for long-term contracts to be bid, and the utilities then would engage in purchasing through those sets of contracts hydropower from other sources, and the most significant source could well be hydropower from Quebec. A group of senators and representatives went off to Denmark just a few months ago, and I'm going to do so in June to witness firsthand offshore wind and see what happened in Denmark and in Amsterdam with regard to the successful development of those that energy source in those locations. So I would expect by July 31st, which is the end of our formal sessions, the time by which we must end all of our debates on legislation, I would expect by then that we would have a bill on the governor's desk which would create the vision for how we're going to encourage and support the creation of wind energy, particularly offshore wind and hydropower contracts, mostly imported because of the scale that we're looking at. This will be necessary in order to meet our growing energy demand and to replace the power that we are now bringing offline as a result of the closing of plants. Even as we do that, we are focused on continuing to reduce our climate change impact, and eventually our goal is to have, as much as possible, a totally green energy future, with as much of it as possible being indigenously generated, so that eventually we stop our exporting of huge amounts of Massachusetts income to other states and other jurisdictions as we purchase their energy at an all too high cost, because we do not have the ability to generate enough energy for ourselves on our own. And to bring our costs down first, at least to the national average, and then hopefully below the national average, by encouraging a change in our energy future that would allow us to be able to come more in line with the costs that others are bearing, and have as green an energy future as possible, with as much of that energy being generated and then obviously consumed right here. I have now exhausted everything I know on the subject, so I will thank you for your very kind attention, and I will take my seat and see if I can learn something from these good gentlemen here.